Now I wish to introduce architect Monica Bahia Schlee from Brazil. She is a landscape architect and urban planner currently lecturing at the Professional Master Program in Design and Heritage of the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, National Counselor of the Institute of Architects of Brazil, and member of the Brazilian Association of Landscape Architects. She is a member of the International Council of Monuments and Sites, member of the Advisory Committee of the Our World Heritage Movement. She has a PhD in architecture from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, a Master of Science in Environmental Structures at the University of Sao Paulo, and a Master in Landscape Architecture at the Pennsylvania State University, when she received the ASLA, American Association of Landscape Architects Merit Award for Excellence in the Study of Landscape Architecture. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to the last session of the UIA World Heritage Convention Conference under the theme Next 50s World Heritage as a Source of Resilience, Humanity, and Innovation. On behalf of the Institute of Architects of Brazil, I thank the coordinators of the UIA Heritage and Cultural Identity Work Program, Cassim Omar and Mohamed Reza, and the UIA Secretary General, Peyin Tam, and the UIA President, José Luis Cortés, for the opportunity to moderate this session that will deal with issues of universal concern as well as specific to the Region 3, the Americas, aiming to reach beyond the built heritage. On this session, we will have professors and heritage conservation experts, Leonardo Castriota from Brazil, Alfredo Conti from Argentina, Umberto Bonomo from Chile, and Patricia from the US. We will have room for questions and answers after the speakers' presentations. And there is a Q&A button in the bottom of the screen, so I kindly invite the audience to send their questions to the speakers during the session. I will notify the speakers through the chat box when there are 5 minutes and 1 minute left to finish their time. For now, it's a pleasure to announce our keynote speaker, Professor Leonardo Castriota, who will offer us an overview of the World Heritage Convention's process of implementation and discuss its performance and challenges on the last 50 years. Professor Leonardo is an architect from Brazil, a professor at the University of Minas Gerais, senior researcher at the National Research Council of Brazil, and vice president of ICOMOS. His previous positions include president of ICOMOS Brazil, researcher at the Rockefeller Foundation and at the Goethe Conservation Institute, director of Cultural Heritage and of the Municipality of Belo Horizonte, president of the Institute of Architects of the Brazilian Department of Minas Gerais, coordinator of the Interdisciplinary Doctorate Program in Sustainable Environment and Heritage, and director of the School of Architecture of the Federal University of Minas Gerais. Leonardo, the floor is yours. It's a pleasure to receive you here.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank, the International Union of Architects in the person of our colleague and friend, José Luis Cortés, and all the organizers, especially Professor Cassim, Professor Monica, for organizing this meeting, which I'm sure will have important results, bringing together contributions from all over the world at this 50th anniversary of UNESCO World Heritage Convention. In my view, it's high time we reflect in a systematic manner on the fundamentals, on the prescribed methodologies, and on the concrete applications of this convention that undoubtedly helped to make the concept of heritage a global one. As a contribution to this discussion, today I will present some considerations, still very initial, on the convention, addressing the apparent contradiction between the ideal of universalism, which underlies that document, and the more recent acceptance of diversity as a basis for cultural policies. I would like to ask the organizers to share my screen, please. Oh, yes. Next one, please. The first part, I'm talking about the World Heritage Convention and the globalization of cultural heritage. Next, please. If since the 19th century and early 20th centuries, some authors such as John Ruskin, next please, and Louis Wrigley had already noted that the idea of cultural heritage transcended national boundaries. It was only after 1945 that the trend towards internationalization gained strength in the field. Next, please. With the emergence of a series of organizations that have contributed to the establishment and diffusion of standards and policies common to the various countries. In fact, if the 18th and especially 19th centuries, next please, nation states began to engage in the protection of the national heritage, it will be from the second half of the 20th century onwards that a new chapter in the internationalization of heritage opens up. Next, please. This perspective led to the creation of a new bureaucratic stratum connected to heritage preservation at the international level, the development of a series of procedures and standards to be followed worldwide, as well as the listing of a series of monuments and sites which are now considered to be of worldwide significance. Together, institutions such as the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, International Council of Museums, ICOM, International Council of Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature have played a central role in the internationalization of cultural heritage by establishing global doctrines, methodologies, and standards for professional practice. This effect is propitiated by a series of actions, ranging from the elaboration of doctrinal documents, which serve as two codes of conduct, to the imposition of common methodologies for conservation through training programs and international seminars, as well as the availability of consultancies and funding mechanisms. As a result, today we have, for the first time in human history, the existence of a World Heritage System with the institutionalization of a uniform standard to deal with pre-existences, which sometimes, with its insistence on universal values and international standards, conflicts, as we'll see, with local and particular visions. Next, please. Second part, I will discuss what I call the malaise of cultural heritage. I use, this free translation of the German word Unbehagen that was used by Freud in his book about the Unbehagen of the civilization. I think we are having a certain malaise in our field. So next one, please. In March 2001, during a trip to Istanbul, Maria Pilar Garcia Cuetos, art historian professor at the University of Oviedo, Spain, lived a very peculiar experience that profoundly transformed her way of thinking about heritage. Guiding a group of 35 Asturians to learn about the work of the Renaissance architect Mimar Sina Aga, the historian, on her way to Little Santa Sofia, suddenly finds herself walking down a dirty road in the lower part of the old Ottoman neighborhood of Sultanahmet, among ruined houses. Next, please. Faced with those buildings, the skeptical looks of the locals and the children, I cite, with a little warm curiosity, she then realized in a revealing instant that all the theoretical armor she had been carefully forming throughout her professional life was of little use and was proven to be there so impractical, so out of place, that in an important turn, she decided to relativize it and, I cite, made some much needed reforms. Next, please. The fact is that For more than 15 years, as she tells us, she had read, reflected, and subscribed to the whole theory of the charters of restoration. She had fought with conviction to save this built memory, which seems to matter to us, she says, only to a few, and which turns out to be so dangerous for speculators. At that moment, however, while searching for a singular building, Maria Pilar finds the wooden architecture of a polychromatic Istanbul, grayish and battered, without the bright colors, without the bitter red, but standing intact. In that moment of sudden revelation, the long accumulated theory appears totally out of place in front of that scenario, in front of that important heritage, but not fitting in the traditional modes that resisted both the 1999 earthquake and countless historical setbacks of that millenary city, as complex as it's beautiful, she says. As perplexity, next one, please, often leads to reflection, Maria Cuetos begins to question the very foundations of knowledge, of the knowledge she had acquired over the years, and especially the principle of authenticity, one of the pillars of Western conservation theory. From that turning point, from which derives the book, the very important book, Humble Condition, I'm translating the Spanish title, Cultural Heritage and the Conservation of its Authenticity. The researcher starts to pursue a different reading of what would be to safeguard the authenticity of our cultural heritage, producing a deep and instigating reflection about the meaning of devoting so much effort to preserve heritage, considering with special attention cultural diversity and the cause-effect relationship between heritage conservation and economic and social development. In addressing such a complex issue as authenticity, the author begins by presenting us with a theoretical review of this concept in the field of mainly European cultural heritage, showing that it's born inextricably linked not only to the theory, but also to the praxis of monumental restoration, and therefore dealing already from the beginning with the challenge or the paradox of trying to preserve intact assets, buildings that are, as she says, the materialization of memory, and as such can be transformed and changed. For the European theory, as Garcia Cuetos notes, the architectural matter inherited from the past is always the receptacle of a series of values, bringing the restorative process while preserving the cultural asset, always a real risk, she says. It's capable of transforming this matter and changing those values. Next, please. From this apparent paradox, the author feels the need to recover the theoretical reflection on the concept of authenticity, showing that it appears precisely when the theory is accepted by UNESCO and widely disseminated in international documents and recommendations are questioned, she says, which state that every object will be authentic since its creation and with all its histories, its history, and that preserving authenticity means safeguarding the matter and the effects of historical time materialized in it. However, at the end of the 20th century, the theoretical elaboration is faced with an inescapable reality, the distinct vision of the experts from Latin America, from the Latin American, African, and Asian cultural sphere, which start from a very different reality to the European one. Since a good part of their architectural goods made with wood, adobe, etc., are subject to continuous repairs and replacements, which make it very difficult to identify the authenticity and the preservation with the preservation of the matter. Next one, please. Next one, please. From this rich, next one, please. From this rich and intense debate, new documents are born, which, like the Nara document, show that the value of authenticities is plural and cannot be applied or understood in the same way in different cultural spheres or in different types of heritage. Next one, please. In this line, we could also mention here the Burra Charter, a document prepared by ICOMOS Australia, the first version of which dates from 1999, but which has had several revisions, and that also relativize these European concepts. Here we have a paradox. If the value of authenticities is plural, is diverse, and can only be understood in the realm of each culture, how can we still adhere to the idea of universality conveyed by the UNESCO World Heritage Convention? Next, please. And here I come to the last part of my presentation, very quick one, in which I'm going to discuss very briefly this paradox between universalism and diversity, and I will defend the idea of a productive noise. Next, please. In November 1946, in the context of the post-Second World War, appeared the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, a specialized agency based in Paris, whose operation is divided into 3 sectors already mentioned in its name. Next, please. UNESCO's culture sector deals with cultural heritage, both tangible, sites, museums, libraries, and archives, and intangible, language, oral history, music, dance, intellectual property. Since the beginning of its activities, this organization, next please, has been involved in major projects in our field, such as the Nubia campaign, launched in 1960. Next please, which aimed to relocate the great temple of Abu Simbel, threatened by the construction of the Aswan Dam on the Nile River. UNESCO's work in the field of heritage led, next please, to the adoption in 1972 of the Convention concerning the protection of the world culture and natural heritage, also known as the Paris Recommendation, an important document, an important normative framework for the protection of heritage worldwide, linking in a single document the concept of nature conservation and preservation of cultural property, recognizing the way in which human beings interact with nature and the need to preserve the balance between the two. Next, please. The system is not exempt from criticism. And one of the most important is that regarding the already mentioned conflict between universalism and diversity. Let us begin citing the preamble of the World Heritage Convention that states very explicitly the universality of value of certain cultural assets, which will implicate in a kind of moral necessity of their conservation. I cite, considering that certain properties forming part of the cultural and natural heritage are of outstanding interest and require conservation as part of the world heritage of humanity as a whole, etc., etc. Next, please. This formulation is very heavily criticized, and to exemplify the most common criticism on the authoritative heritage discourse, a term coined by Laura Jane Smith, I will recur to her, to Laura Jane Smith, who in her book, Heritage Uses, states that the word heritage draw part of its authority exactly from the idea of its universal applicability. I cite, part of the authority of the European authoritative heritage discourse lies in its self-legitimizing claim that it's universally applicable and that there are or should be universal cultural values and expressions. This whole discourse of universality is itself a strategy of legitimizing the values and nature of the heritage that underlies the authorized heritage discourse. The discourse of universality makes a moral appeal to the sense of the brotherhood of humanity. This kind of appeal contributes to its persuasive power. End of quotation. We can notice how she makes clear here the intrinsic link between universalism on the one side and the power structures created or recreated by e-commerce, by UNESCO on the other side. Well, next one, please. On the other hand, to be very, very brief, I would like to bring also to our consideration, in my mind, a very precise response to this criticism that is formulated acutely by Rodney Harrison, that reversely states that, I'm quoting, it's going to be this very clear claim to universality that opens up the possibility of a non-Western indigenous minority and post-colonial critique, that it's ultimately going to be responsible for the transformation in heritage practices that took place in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Next one, please. You know, recognizing that the idea of cultural heritage is a European invention, Rodney Harrison acknowledged that its claim to universality makes necessarily it to expand. He says, by expressing itself as a universal convention that relates to world heritage, the World Heritage Convention is explicitly forced to confront the issue of representation whenever claims are made contrary to its definition of heritage. Had the convention not expressed itself as a set of universal values, there would have been no need for those working with the convention to consider all counterclaims or requests for representation. According to his view, that I endorse, it will be universalism itself that will provoke the need to always redefine heritage that we can see at work in the implementation of the convention since 1972. The diversity of views brought by other cultures, especially those non-European ones, produces then a kind of productive noise, productive discomfort that makes the World Heritage field expand continuously. Next one, please. We should show some examples as first, the contribution of the vision, this one, the last one, the contribution of the vision of the native people of Australia and New Zealand on the category of cultural landscape, calling into question the strict division between nature and culture. As we know, this category was accepted in 1992, 20 years after the launch of the convention, when Ayers Mountain was inscribed as a cultural landscape. The very fact that this hill has no human intervention is just a symbolic layer that makes it humanly and spiritually relevant. Next one, please. Another important contribution to the expansion of the World Heritage idea came from Asia and Africa with the establishment of the Intangible Heritage List and the Intangible Heritage Convention in 2003. We won't have time to discuss it in depth, but there are two important contributions that come from non-European regions. To finish, next one, please. I would like to put some questions, the same questions we did at our ICOMOS LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean Scientific Symposium last year, when we reflected on the 50th anniversary of the convention. Next one, please. What contributions could we from Latin America bring to the advancement of the World Heritage Convention in this perspective? The first one I would like to mention, as is one field undoubtedly, would be the discussion of landscape. We in Latin America have very important contributions, especially from the point of view of our native peoples, who, like the Australian Aboriginals, deny this strong European division between nature and culture, considering it from a perspective where all beings are included in a kind of maternal whole. We have a lot of different original native concepts, like, for instance, the idea of Pachamama. The second point, deriving from this perspective, it also seems to me that we have important contributions to the theme of the relationship between heritage and sustainable development. For example, with the idea of good living. It's a free translation of a native word, an epistemological, ethical, political perspective that comes from the Andes, from Peru, from Ecuador, from Bolivia, that will put also into question our anthropocentric view on the exploitation of nature, and will present us with a more, equitable relation between man and nature. And last one, another important derivation of the idea of landscape would be, from a point of view, the reinterpretation of the difficulties we have with the ideas of historic urban landscape and its connections with the idea of cultural landscape. This contraposition is still very Eurocentric, conceptualized. And I think that we should think, the idea of cultural landscape and historic urban landscape, considering another kind of cities, different from the European ones. Our cities in Latin America are different from European. Our historic centers are heterogeneous, not homogeneous. The occupation of the territory is also quite distinct, in our view. From our perspective, from these different views, we could reread the idea of an urban landscape, using this difference and not denying it, so that we could see the interconnections between cultural landscape, historic urban landscape. I think there are only, some quick points that we should contribute to the discussion that is being led, all over the world on this 50th anniversary. And I think we should use this productive, difference that exists between the ideas and the perspectives of each culture to make our universality contained in the convention expand. I thank you very much. Next one, please. And I leave you my address, my email. Next one, please. Yes. My mail, want to contact me further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, for your very thought-provoking talk and your reflections regarding the conflict between the universalism and diversity and its implications for the World Heritage System in several dimensions. Thank you very much. Now I will pass the floor to our guest speaker, Alfredo Conti. Alfredo is an architect from Argentina who will talk about the achievements and challenges of the World Heritage Convention in Latin America and the Caribbean. Alfredo is an advisor at the National Historic Monuments and Sites of Argentina and professor at the La Plata University, where he directs the Institute of Research and Tourism and serves as UNESCO Chair on Cultural Tourism. He is also a consultant in projects related to cultural heritage in different countries of the Americas, Europe, and Asia. At ICOMOS, he acts as expert in evaluation, monitoring, and advisory missions related to the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. He has also collaborated in activities of the Get Conservation Institute and the World Monuments Fund. Alfredo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Monica, for the introduction. And dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. First, I would like to especially thank the International Union of Architects for their kind invitation to attend this meeting and to be part of this important meeting to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to share the screen. I think you can see the full screen. Can you? Okay, yes. All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this will be a very brief overview of the implementation of the World Heritage Convention in Latin America, especially how the region is represented on the World Heritage List. And at the end of the presentation, we will discuss challenges for the next 50 years and how World Heritage Convention could contribute to sustainability, resilience, and humanity. So first, for UNESCO, the region is Latin America and the Caribbean, and we have to say that all the countries from the region have accepted.
Déjame tomarme 2 tacitas de esto.
Sorry. So all the countries from the region have accepted or ratified the convention. There are currently 33 parties, state parties from the region, and Latin America and the Caribbean have 143 properties inscribed on the World Heritage List. 100 are cultural properties, 35 are natural, and 8 are mixed. So you can notice an imbalance between cultural and natural properties, but this is the imbalance list also at the World Heritage List. There is also a lack of balance if we consider how many properties each country of the region has inscribed on the list. Mexico has 35 properties inscribed after Brazil, who has 23. Mexico and Brazil have traditionally been the leaders countries in the regions in the implementation of the convention. And after these countries, there is a decreasing number of sites related to science specific. And the most represented heritage types from the region are urban properties, that means historic centers, urban areas, etc., and archaeological sites. If we consider urban properties inscribed on the World Heritage List, most of them correspond to historic centers from the colonial period. That means the 17th and 18th centuries, and properties corresponding to the 19th and 20th century are actually exceptional. We can mention the city of Valparaiso in Chile, which has important parts from the 19th and early 20th century, and Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil, who was the first property of the 20th century inscribed on the World Heritage List. But if we consider how the inscription of this urban property was justified, we notice that over the first decades of implementation of the convention, there was a preeminence of historical and aesthetic values and a prevailing monumental vision of heritage. But we can also notice for this region in particular that there was a history of the region told mainly from the metropolis. There was, I would say, an Eurocentric vision of heritage and of heritage. If we read the justifications adopted by the World Heritage Committee, we can notice the repeated use of terms such as colonization, introduction, adaptation, exploration, even exploration of the world. So that means that those arguments, even though they were elaborated in Latin America, they were based on Eurocentric concepts. There are, for instance, references to Renaissance urbanism and Baroque architecture, and mentions of the fusion between the imported and the local through the intervention of native workers. And something which is astonishing, there are practically no references in the justification of outstanding universal value to the African presence in the region. This presence, which is of course very important Latin American culture, is mentioned only in the cases of the cities of Sao Paulo in Brazil and Panama City. But we know that cities and towns are not only monuments, buildings, urban fabric, urban spaces, but they are especially people who live in, people who visit them, people who work in those cities. And this more comprehensive understanding of the city was incorporated only over the last, I would say, archaeological sites, which is the second most represented typology on the list, is mostly represented by the great urban centers of the pre-European cities, both in Middle America, that is Mexico and Central America, and in South America in India. With a few exceptions of, let's say, less important archaeological sites, but important because they testify to other less important cultures, less developed cultures in Latin America. The region played also a significant role in the introduction of cultural landscapes, and you can see here two pictures from the cultural landscape in Cuba related to the tobacco production and sugar production, which were the two first cultural landscapes inscribed on the World Heritage. But there is a topic where I think the genius of Latin America and the creative genius of Latin America is very well expressed, and it is modern heritage. In these two pictures, I am showing details of two buildings inscribed on the World Heritage List: the house and studio of Luis Barragan in Mexico City and the Church of Atlantida in Uruguay. And you can notice in the case of Barragan's house how this architect merged the European avant-garde with the traditional Mexican architecture, creating a unique and very special work. And in the case of the Church of Atlantida, you can see how innovative structural forms or designs are constructed using the traditional material, the area which is brick. And there are these, I would say, very significant properties, which are the university campuses in Venezuela and in Mexico, inscribed on the World Heritage List. And these are very important because they show a combination among urbanism, architecture, landscape design, and art. And I would like to mention this special property, the so-called Capaclan, or main Indian road, inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2014. Because this is related to a very long network of roads in the Andean side of South America, on the Andean Cordillera. They were constructed by cultures who inhabited the region over centuries, and when the Spaniards arrived in this region, all these cultures were encompassed in the Inca. This is a very special property because it means the work, the common work among 6 South American countries. These 6 countries worked about 12 years to build up the nomination dossier, and they are working from the inscription onwards on the common management and the inclusion of local population, of indigenous groups, etc. And I wanted to specifically mention this example because this is an example of cooperation, which I think is very important for the future, not only of the convention, but for humanity. Common work among countries which have different legal systems, administrative structures. I think it's quite difficult to think on the next 50 because the changes in the world, in society, are so fast that we actually don't know what could happen in 20 or 30 years. But of course, we have identified some challenges, at least for the next future. And first of all, some of these challenges are not only for Latin American countries, but I would say for the whole world, even though there are some specific challenges for this region. First of all, the impact of the climate change, you know, that jeopardizes not only the World Heritage property, but the planet itself, humanity itself. Afterwards, there is a necessity of updating of protection management processes and instruments. Actually, in many cases in Latin America, we notice that the management instruments are not updated, they are not useful anymore, and they should be updated, especially taking into account the inclusion of all stakeholders. We have to think also on the incorporation of the perspective of sustainable development. The World Heritage Committee issued in 2015 a policy document and request the incorporation of the sustainable development in all the processes related to World Heritage. We have to work very much on people-based management. Once again, the World Heritage properties or heritage properties in general are not only materials, monuments, urban spaces, but we have to consider especially people. And so it's very important the consideration of all stakeholders are right. Tourism is also a problem in many World Heritage sites all over the world. So the management to ensure sustainable tourism is one of the main challenges for them. And especially for Latin America, I think we have to improve the representativity of the region. Explore new heritage types, not so much focusing on historic center, on historic monuments, on archaeological sites, but with a very special request that we have to construct a narrative of our values from our vision, from the. And I would like to finish this presentation in the framework of the title of this meeting organized by the International Union of Architects, with some ideas on how World Heritage, and I would say heritage in general, could be a source of resilience and innovation. I think that understanding and shared heritage values can contribute to social cohesion and cultural, which is very important indeed. The incorporation of digital resources for the interpretation of heritage is not so much used in Latin America, but we know practically everyone has a mobile phone today, and this is a very important instrument to disseminate ideas, opinions, etc., and to disseminate the values of heritage. The incorporation of traditional knowledge can contribute to manage some impacts of the climate change. We are now considering local populations, local communities, indigenous groups, and they do have knowledges that we didn't have taken into consideration in dealing with heritage, with cities, with towns, and they can teach us a lot about how to deal with the use, the sustainable use of material, construction techniques that could help to manage climate change. Some colleagues spoke, especially yesterday, on the historic urban landscape approach. This is not new indeed, because the recommendations has some 11 or 12 years. But I must say that only a few towns in Latin America have applied this approach. And I consider, even with the comments made by Leonardo a few minutes ago, but it's an approach that brings together the natural and the cultural, the tangible and the intangible, and it's a useful approach to manage the thousands. Also, the adequate use of heritage could be a means to reach sustainability at environmental, social, and economic levels. And I think we have to foster innovative and sustainable tourism activities that take especially into account the inclusion of local population and local. So this is the end of my presentation. I thank you very much. I'm ready if there are some questions. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Alfredo. Very good presentation.
Thank you very much, Alfredo, for your great presentation and very informative, and for sharing with us your reflections concerning the heritage future challenges and also the potential inputs of the Latin American and Caribbean region. Thank you very much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Patricia O'Donnell from the US, who will talk about our shared landscape heritage and planetary rights. Patricia is a preservation landscape architect and urban planner. She founded Heritage Landscapes, a heritage landscape company, in 1987, and currently serves as president of our World Heritage Foundation, a civil society engagement heritage organization. And her professional work is wholly dedicated to aiding places of heritage, with more than 600 professional commissions and 99 professional awards for planning, protection, the management, and for enabling cultural, economic, environmental, and society sustainability. Patricia, thank you very much to be here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and wish to thank UIA for bringing together this important meeting, and Monica and the team from the Americas for this particular regional focus. If I can screen share, I will show my presentation here. Great. So I'm interested in heritage looking forward aspect of this meeting, and I think that from my perspective, cultural landscapes are a platform for planetary rights, and as heritage professionals, we need to do some significant work on shifting our rather rigid structures to an adaptive heritage management platform for the planetary future. I suggest that World Heritage Looking Forward is a process of seeking planetary rights that brings respect for the living earth, unifying culture and nature, and integrating humanity, but not as the parasite, shall we say, that perhaps is what has gotten us to this current state of the planet. I'd like to recognize the Abenaki tribe of the Lake Champlain Basin where I live, and the indigenous, their worldwide traditions and the recognition of the hardships borne over generations. I think the notion of World Heritage really looks back to and springs forward from the UNESCO Constitution of 1945. And I would just highlight a few words here. Peace founded on intellectual and moral solidarity, mutual understanding. And if we look at these kinds of words through a contemporary lens, I suggest that heritage can be an inclusive and just platform for mutual respect of people and planet. Our shared commonwealth of humanity and nature is the co-created landscape. And with the Convention on Biodiversity 2 years ago indicating that 75% of the terrestrial planet is deeply altered by humanity, that area of co-creation, some of which is ascendant and exceptional heritage, some of which is destroyed places of the planet, is really a broad platform for our work. And if we can use heritage as that kind of platform, it offers a way forward to move beyond greed, conflict, and suffering toward global coexistence and peace, with an understanding that much of this activity happens at the local level, which is what our World Heritage Consortium, a group of people from around the world, are interested in. The World Heritage Convention Article 5 is of particular interest to our World Heritage, and that's about ensuring effective and active measures for the protection of heritage, both cultural and natural, with a function in the life of a community. So, given the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage in 2022, the time is ripe to consider planetary rights with common respect and dignity for all life forms, in a bioculturally diverse approach. And this gives rise to increased importance in cultural landscapes, the combined works of humanity and nature. If we look at the issues of sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals, we can see the triad of environment, economy, and society. And in my opinion, heritage sustains culture and nature permeate at all levels. And if we shift from resources to the functional word of assets, we recognize that each of these is inherently valuable. When we look at cultural landscapes within the context of regions, the way we analyze it changes, but the physical attributes of place are listed here on the left. And in this case, they're applied to the OAC's World Heritage of Al Ain in the United Arab Emirates. We also have cultural landscapes that are vessels of intangible heritage and traditions, and we can list the ways in which those need to be assessed, but documentation of intangible is a baseline, and it requires leadership in local values. So just to look at how these work together, we have the concepts of biological diversity and cultural diversity that are often considered separate. If we look at the biological, we have natural and human-shaped habitats. If we look at the cultural, tangible, and intangible heritage, then if we put the diagram together, we see that there are considerable overlaps and that these are in fact entangled and inseparable. Just to highlight a few key points, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity of '92 clearly recognizes a vital role for humanity, highlights the role of women in conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So we have this interplay of people and place. And the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UN DRIP in 2007, highlights the respect for the indigenous cultures, knowledge, and traditions and practices in the proper management of the environment. And there's increasing interest in looking at traditional knowledge as a way forward, seeing cultures that have deep time relationships to place and have stewarded and sustained those. We're all familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Increasingly important to look at the integration of these. And I think there's been some good progress from the culture side in moving toward the 2031 next agenda with a greater integration of culture. The integration of nature needs to be paired and going forward. And if we look at each of these, we see aspects of both humanity and the planet. I would hope that in 2031, we would balance those effectively. Looking at just a few projects as examples, in this work, we balanced ecological restoration, social inclusion, and historic preservation, and created in a park for public use a more diverse and uplifting place. At Planting Fields, we're looking at the combined approach of restoring historic design, managing horticultural collections, uplifting ecology, enhancing visitors' experience, and making management more easy while aligning that local work to UN SDGs. And then looking at the individual projects to bring forward that planning. We're bringing forward the notions of carbon sequestration, stormwater absorption, energy conservation that the work of replacing trees has, as well as its other benefits. At Shelburne Farms, they're cultivating a conservation ethic at the Institute for Sustainable Schools and partnering globally using the UN SDGs as a platform. And learning is at the core for the younger generation. This local place is working toward solar field with net zero carbon, understanding that coming forward is a key aspect. I would also just give a global viewpoint and recognize that those of us in the culture field don't often look at this website, but Protected Planet is looking at global nature and communities and how those are protected into the future. What we see currently is 16.8% terrestrial and 8.0%. And this puts into perspective the targets of 30 and 50% of the protected planet in order for the Earth to flourish in the future, which it is not today. So we need a global collaborative action to achieve drawdown, which is the point at which carbon is sequestered to a greater degree than it is released. And I just close with the Earth needs our help, and heritage is a platform for that. Our challenge is co-creation of a bioculturally diverse future of carbon sequestration and planetary justice for all life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia.
Congratulations, very good. Very good.
Very
trying to look for the future here instead of cataloging what the excellence of World Heritage
perspective view.
Yes, it's inspiring presentation, and it's very meaningful to remind us that our common challenge is to co-create an inclusive future for all life on Earth, and also to recognize the planetary rights in a biocultural diverse approach. Thank you very much. Now I will pass the floor to Umberto Bonomo from Chile, who will talk about some specificities of the modern architecture in Latin America. Umberto Bonomo is an architect and has a PhD in architecture and urban studies. He is currently an associate professor at the School of Architecture of the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and he is part of the board of our World Heritage Foundation. He works on heritage, urbanism, and social housing, looking for points of contact between theory and practice. He is an active member of Documomo Chile, has done consultancies and studies for the Ministry of Culture, Arts and Heritage in Chile, for CEPAL, and for the Inter-American Development Bank, among others. Umberto, thank you very much to be here with us. The floor is yours.
Gracias.
Okay, can you hear me now? Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Monica, and thank you also to the International Union of Architecture for the organization of this event, and for inviting me to be part of it and share with you part of my last research. Today's presentation is linked to a case study and a problem, and like all problems, it's both local and global, both specific and universal. I say this to link myself with the debate proposed by Leonardo and Alfredo in their presentation. The case study I'm going to talk about in this is the common space, understood here as a different kind of space in our cities. The city has traditionally been understood as the dichotomous confrontation between the private space and the dwelling and the public space of the same city. However, in recent years, studies focusing on analysis and other conditions, the common space have multiplied. This probably because the idea of the common has returned to be part of the discussion that underlie architecture, urbanism, sociology, and anthropology, and because these ideas reflects the way in which we live together. The idea of the common is an important value and heritage for our society and our cities. This dissertation explores the spatial and formal characteristics of this exemplary experience of modern architecture and urban planning, discusses the challenges they are facing and their potential in understanding the common space as the field of future project and new heritage field that is important to preserve. When the concept of the common is analyzed, both from the field of architecture and from the other social science and humanities, it's possible to notice how quickly the field of meaning linked to this term flourish. The contribution of the historiography on the great modern housing complexes and the neighborhood units do not identify the significant value that the common space has in the radical operation and urban design and architecture. The origin of the concept of the neighborhood unit goes back to the work developed by Clarence Stein and Harry Wright and Radburn in 1928 and Clarence Perry in 1929. The common space of the modern neighborhood unit is probably one of the most important inventions of modern architecture, and very probably one of the weakest and misunderstood flanks of this residential project for the metropolis. What is suggested here is that the neighborhood unit of the 40 and the 70 not only revolutionized the image of the city, but by providing new scales to housing factory, they meant an even greater revolution due to the fact of capturing the common space as a new urban dimension and intermediate place of diffuse ownership and articulated governance. In Latin America, Latin America's neighbor unit of the second post-war, the use of the apartment blocks or the tower impacts on the occupation of the land, on the amount and availability of common space for recreation, on the location of community facilities in the property systems, and therefore in the governance model of said urban realities. In these projects, the garden city layout were replaced by green areas not crossed by vehicular streets, and therefore configuring macro blocks penetrated only by pedestrian accesses, pathways to the apartment buildings. During the 30s, to install heavily the idea of ownership in many countries in Latin America, the well-known horizontal property laws or co-ownership laws were approved. This fact must be considered really fundamental, because suppose that the model of administration, ownership, and relationship of the family with its own space transgress the limits of the house or the apartment and invade the space shared by all, such as corridors, stairwells, elevators, accesses, gardens, and the equipment of the community itself, which is in turn is inserted and open up to the city. The construction of the community was an explicit intention by the institution to build these complexes in line with the postulate that had been introduced by Gideon in the book Architecture and Community, where the Swiss author highlights the role of architecture in the educational process of the community. The murals by Candido Portinari and Burle Marx in Pedregulho in Rio de Janeiro is a proof of that. The common space of housing complexes was, and it is today, the art of the community life, the place to share and create a new society. This common space could not be anonymous, conventional, and mute, but had to be able to communicate and educate. The common is a fundamental heritage value. With this perspective, we understand here the common as an important value of our Latin American metropolis. This approach has been presented in the framework of the transnational dialogue meeting organized in November last year by our World Heritage Group, led by Monica, and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And the idea of this, to understand the common space as an heritage, as an heritage value, is important to link also the local to the international, the property of you know, the specificity to universality. In these terms, the common space, it was an important project innovation from a legal and formal and conceptual point of view that challenged the traditional use and administration system of the city. It was also a space of strong creative possibility, the place to which the role of creating the new community was assigned. The modern neighborhood unit is analyzed, if analyzed in retrospect, challenge the constructive possibility of the new materials, demonstrate the power of ideas and the capacity of the project to build new imaginary when they are accompanied by political will. These values are well recognized today by the inhabitants that fight for their protection and declaration. To conclude, if we understand that heritage is a social construction, a field of live, dynamic, and open conflicts, and not just a crystallized field of successes and exemplary situation, we realize that these great Latin American neighborhood units are the reflection and the result of a significant and complex process of urban, social, technological, constructive, legal, and institutional modernization. It is under these dynamics and this polyhedral dimension that must be understood, studied, interpreted, and eventually recovered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Muchas
Umberto,
gracias, Humberto.
for your reflections on the dichotomy between the private built space and the public space in the urban context of Latin America, and for sharing with us your thought-provoking research on the common spaces as another condition of space that has a legitimate potential to be recognized as World Heritage asset from the modern housing, from the modern architecture. Thank you very much. Now I will read the questions from the audience to those our speakers. First, I have two comments congratulating the speakers from Fanny Tsnika from Greece, and the other one is anonymous. Jamel Matmati, his question is, what do you think about the marriage between modern architecture and heritage architecture? What must be respected? And another question is from Amy Roslan from Malaysia. The question is from to Umberto Bonomo. First of all, thank you for sharing your research on common space as heritage. My question is for the context of Latin America, when common space belongs to the public, for example, the self-organized neighborhood. How is the response from the authority political side?
Can I answer, Monica?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that it's. Thank you, Amy, for the question. I think that the first step is to recognize the common as a specific kind of space, as I said in the presentation, because if we do that, we are able to keep all the specificity and the challenge that the this particular kind of space has. And in many cases, they not happen, you know, and that is the first part of the problem. Normally we consider the space of a specific community dependent from the property, if it's of a co-ownership or if it's public, but we consider the specific space of a community as a public space, and it's not public because it's the transitional space between, you know, the private space of the houses and the public space of the dominions of the state. And in my opinion, there are no many tools today to work with these in Latin America. But not also in Latin America. I think that it's a worldwide problem because normally common space, you know, disappear from the discussion or historiography also.
Thank you very much, Umberto. I will ask the other speakers if they have comments on that matter.
May I, Monica?
Sure.
Thank you. No, very briefly, there was a question related to the incorporation of modern or contemporary architecture. And I would say that contemporary architecture is not only welcomed in, let's say, historic areas or centers, but it's necessary. And I think we have to consider that even when we are talking about historic center or historic areas, besides the historical or architectural or aesthetic values, those areas must continue to house a community. And that's the main purpose of a city, of a town, of a neighborhood, to house people. And we know that the society changes over time. And of course, the space where they live must have the capability of adapting to those changes. And that is why we need modern architecture, we need modern infrastructure, we need modern urban furniture, etc. But our challenge as conservators, as planners and conservators, is how to balance the conservation of those values with the incorporation of contemporary architecture. From my point of view and on the basis of my experience, I think one of the main aspects to take into account is the scale. I mean, the height, the use of local ways of occupying urban plots, the use, perhaps in some cases, traditional typologies can be reinterpreted in modern terms. So this would be my brief response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. We have 2 questions more from our audience. The first one is from Suraj Kanal. What about traditional skill transfer and livelihood opportunities for people in heritage conservation and restoration? And the other one is from Xian Kawan. In this cosmopolitan neoliberal context of urbanism, the narrative of loss because of the blurring between the common and the private space, is underway. So how can we expect the sustainability into heritage cities, which are overarching between being affected by this dichotomy? I mean that he perhaps, or she perhaps, mean the dichotomy between the private and public space.
Monica, can I jump in on the traditional skills issue? I mean,
Sure.
I think that we're seeing a rise in skill interest. We're also seeing a loss of the skilled crafts persons who are older, and there are a number of good programs that are highlighting the transfer of knowledge from older generations to younger generations. They're small programs, but some of them are very effective. I know that some of the internships are key, and also apprenticeships. So I think that respect for traditional skills is increased, and in the heritage world, we need to highlight some of these models and bring forward more intergenerational transfer.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think that Umberto has and Leonardo both want to do some comments, make some comments.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I would like to link to the question about this dichotomy relationship between private and common and public, etc. In this presentation this morning, we feel many dichotomies really between local and global, specific and universal, public and common or private. And I think that I really appreciate the provocation, Leonardo provocation, and Alfredo also. But I think that the beautiful of work in heritage and heritage field in general is that the dichotomies, these apparent contraposition of concepts are the ground, the very rich and ground of creativity and integration between diversity, and the contraposition in the field of heritage or in heritage studies is something positive and not necessarily negative. You know, there is another important dichotomy between antiquity and you know, the value of antiquity in heritage that Alfredo spoke about, that related with modern architecture. How we consider, if we consider, for example, the Brasilia Cathedral that was declared before the finishing of the construction. You know, what is the value of antiquity today in heritage? I think that to work with this contraposition and this dichotomic concept, it's very interesting, and it's part of the work. We not pretend to solve the dichotomy. We need to, you know, surf into it.
Thank you very much, Umberto. Before passing the floor to Leonardo, there is a last question from Cristina Meneghello. She asked, in terms of contested, disputed heritage in war scenes or political conflicts, how can we adapt local disputed rights to the so-called planetary rights? I think it's more for Patricia, but it's something that maybe Leonardo also may address. So Leonardo, go on, and then I pass the floor to Patricia.
Yeah, I would like to make some, you know, very brief comments on this question of the traditional knowledge. And it's just a small remark, you know, I firmly believe that we are kind of given more value now. You know, we are recovering a traditional knowledge, because for a lot of decades in Latin America, we used modern techniques to make, you know, restoration for traditional buildings. And for, I would say, 3 decades, the official agencies, they came to the conclusion that they should, you know, go back to the traditional knowledge. The problem is that there was a discontinuity in the transmission of this knowledge. And so we've made a research in Brazil we planned our research for the whole Brazil, but we could make it for some states in which we would, we would point and would register the traditional techniques that still existed. And what we notice is that after 30 years of this investment of the official agencies, there was a lot of resurgence of traditional techniques that was brought by the workshops, introduced by these official agencies. There was first a discontinuity, and now people are kind of relearning, these traditional techniques, sometimes from the continuity, but mostly from the action of the official agencies. For instance, in Ouro Preto, we could find a lot of traditional techniques, some of them that had disappeared for 100 years. They were kind of reintroduced. It's an interesting phenomenon that I would like to point. This mixture of, I would say, organic transmission and also institutional transmission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonardo. And I'll pass the floor to Patricia for the Christina's Meneghello.
Thanks. This is a really interesting question that Christina puts forward. I mean, I think it's the first thing we should say is war and political conflict processes often negate all rights. Essentially, rights are removed from all of the populace, those who are engaged in the conflict and those who live in the place where the conflict is happening. So what we're looking to do with this platform of thinking about planetary rights is to integrate better the natural and the cultural and think about heritage as mixed, having aspects of nature and aspects of culture as opposed to isolated, and to recognize that the human position of user of heritage as opposed to the human position of supporter and caretaker of heritage has to be flipped, and we need to move away from consumptive thinking to a more sustainable approach to the future of our heritage of all types. So, that's a part also of peace building. So we can only really have heritage go into the future if we have peace.
Thank you, Patricia. I think that we are running out of time. I also had a couple of questions, but I think that I will pass to Cassim to make his comments and summarize the conference, and then to Pei. Thank you very much. Thank you, especially for our great talks of our speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica,
Thank you
for managing the session well. And also thank you for the speakers for giving us quite an engaging presentations with lots of ideas and inspiration. It's my feeling as if probably we needed actually much more time than we gave you. We are sorry for that. I think you really wanted more like 25 to 30 minutes for presentation for us to really benefit. Anyway, I'll give a brief summary of what we've gone through for the last 3 days as a recap of this, not as an exhaustive one. We'll have a full Congress report on the UIA website plus the presentations for people to be able to actually go through. Mine are just a quick pick up notes that have actually been gleaned from the presentations.
Cassim,
Sorry? Yes?
Sorry. Sorry, because I have to leave, but on the name of the International Union of Architects, I want to thank Monica and you and all the speakers. It has been a wonderful day, and to congratulate Cassim and all the co-directors of this working group, because I think all the presentations have been really excellent, and UIA is proud of all of you. So I hope we can work hard on disseminate all this information around the world, because it is very important. Sorry that I have to leave, but thank you very much for everything. And well, Paying will make the last words after Kasim will make a resume. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President. Bye. Okay. Now, in terms of the lessons and experiences that we've had, I think I'll start off by the general introduction that we were given by our moderator on the first day, who laid out some of the ideas and concepts that have been elucidated in the 3 days that we've gone through, including issues to do with authenticity, which Professor Leonardo Castriota has really ably demonstrated the dichotomy that Umberto Bonomo was talking about, especially issues to do with universality versus diversity, and also creating the ground, rich ground for the discussions which have been going on in the last 50 years around the issues of representation, because some people feel that they're not in the overall human brotherhood that Professor Castriota brought out. In terms of actually approaches, we've been presented with adaptive reuse of heritage properties, where architects have attempted to actually reuse and repurpose heritage, including use of modern technologies for the betterment of society. And this was ably demonstrated in Bath in the first day. Then also we had new approaches in terms of planning of urban spaces, of heritage places that were given by Professor Somian, while also we looked at sustainable use of heritage resources, including the combination between man and nature that Kiriyama and also Professor Tana alluded to. Above all, Professor Tana actually brought a very good terminology that wrapped around what we are developing today is actually what will end up being the heritage of tomorrow. That is, the architecture of today is what is the heritage of tomorrow, and the importance of us doing whatever we are doing carefully now, because that's what we'll be confronted with going forward. We also had different aspects of adaptation of technology as a means of not only looking at the various heritage properties through mapping of problems, but also developing products for the purposes of non-invasive interpretation and presentation that Alfredo Conti actually has alluded to. And this I'm referring to also what was presented during the Great Wall about use of non-destructive methods in the assessment and determination of, or rather documentation of heritage properties for a faster assessment of the problems therein. We also looked at issues to do of recovery processes, and these actually were well presented through by the Professor Biglin from Turkey, and also architect Pandugar, who actually gave us a well-documented processes of how areas have actually been devastated for Turkey, and the need for actually faster documentation and ways of faster recovery, vis-a-vis Pashupati example, where we were shown how it has been able to recover from such. Then also we had the approaches that are also being developed through research in terms of meta models of how to quickly be able to come up with processes that are able to not only document, create solutions, but also implement, while at the same time learning from the same. Now, to come to today's presentation, I think we had a very stimulating discussion and a provocative discussion about the issue between authenticity and universality, but in the, or rather diversity. And in this, I would wish to link it to what was started off by George Abungu in his GAP strategy by the UNESCO World Heritage Center, which is actually an admission that actually there is underrepresentation brought about because of the fact that, as Professor Castriota said, universal values gives an illusion of the fact that there are some other places that we start talking about their representation. So, and I like to sort of highlight this, where you say that this 50th anniversary is a chance for us, or an opportunity to provide for the discussions and dialogue around our common differences and unique views of the cultural heritage, so as to sustainably exploit opportunities in the next 50 years, which is the task before us. And also, at the same time, we've been given other aspects that need to be brought on board, including new approaches by where Patricia told us about the integrated design approach to sort of allow sustainable development through use of heritage as a platform, and to ensure inclusive future for all of Earth on all of planet Earth's inhabitants. In addition, Conti gave us a number of interventions which can be necessary to be able to actually drive this process forward, including people-based conservation of people-based management conservation, where all stakeholders and rights holders are taken into account, issues to do with inclusion and incorporation of traditional knowledge. And we've seen this it was alluded that it's being done in Andes. We've seen in the Kayas and in Macau. So all these are some of the innovative ways in coming up with a sustainable way of actually managing our cultural heritage resources for the betterment of the planet as a whole. Lastly, I would wish to extend my gratitude and thanks to our President, Jose Luis Cortez, our Secretary General, Payington, the Secretariat staff, led by Sonia, Muyati, and Claudia, all the speakers, our guest moderator, that is Professor Abungu, my co-director, my UIA-HCI work program team, including Anjumala, Samir, Nida, Monica, Edward, and Mala, and lastly, the audience for having made this conference a success. Thank you. And now I'll pass on the floor to our Secretary General to make her concluding remarks. Thank you.
Hello. On behalf of the UIA, we would like to thank all the participants who have taken time off from their very busy schedule for the last 3 days to join us in this World Heritage Convention. I hope you have enjoyed and benefited from all the sessions, and I truly enjoyed them myself. This convention, with the assembly of presenters by experts in this topic from the 5 regions, has served as a great platform for sharing of knowledge, experience, and aspiration. It has stimulated fruitful discussions, which has definitely resulted in positive outcomes that will be integrated into the upcoming UIA Copenhagen World Congress discussion in July this year. We hope all of you will be able to participate actively in this UIA World Congress with the theme, Sustainable Future Leaves No One Behind, and join us to celebrate the UIA 75th anniversary. The early bird registration will end at the end of March. We would also like to register our appreciation towards all our presenters and moderators for your contribution, and all your presentations and deliberations have been really insightful and informative. Thanks as well to the committee members, including Samuel, Nida, Maria, Monica, Anju, and Edward under the UIA Cultural and Heritage Work Program, led by the co-directors Muhammad Habib, Reza, and Kasim Mubarak Omar, who have worked very hard in organizing this convention, and the effort made in raising awareness on the impact on the important roles played by our heritage and culture in contributing to the UN 17 SDGs and on the quality and overall well-being of the community. We also wish to express our gratitude towards UNESCO World Heritage Center, ICROM, and ICOMOS for the supports given. We hope to be able to continue with this very meaningful collaboration and jointly push for this very important agenda. And last but not least, credit should also accorded to the UIA Secretariat, Sonia, Muyati, and Claudia, for all the hard work that's gone into coordinating and promoting this convention. And thank you once again, and I hope to see all of you soon. And I really hope to see all of you in our Copenhagen Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Payne.
So we would like to officially close this convention.